Creepypastas are great, but what's a horror story you have experienced? I was visiting my sister, who lived in a pretty decent part of Las Vegas at the time. She asked me if I could take out the trash while she was trying to do something else, so I was going out alone. The dumpsters weren't far from the entrance of the building, but they were in a slightly darker part of the parking lot. I lived in a super sketchy section of Philadelphia for years for school, so I'd like to think my gut is pretty good at detecting danger. It was screaming that night. I got about 10 from the dumpsters, Kobe'd the shit, and ran. I told my sister something was wrong out there. Didn't know what, but something. After my sister got home from work the next day, she asked me what I saw the night before. I told her I didn't see anything, just felt absolute danger. She said building management sent out a text blast asking if anyone saw anything suspicious because a woman was raped in the parking lot of the complex down the street when she was taking out trash. Apparently, a couple guys saw a dude skulking near the dumpsters in the parking of a different complex further up the street, so the cops were trying to figure out if the rapist was at my sister's complex and got scared, if everything might be connected. So I had to go talk to the cops about how I threw the trash and ran because something screamed danger. I'd quit forensics they had, but they did actually connect the three scenes, and they actually eventually caught the guy like 2 years later. Turns out dude attacked multiple women over the years by hiding at the dumpsters at night. So I'd how close I was to being a victim that night, but I'm just very glad I listened to my gut. I used to live in Eugene, Oregon, a city widely known for its large homeless population. My apartment was right near the dumpster, so you'd hear dudes digging around out there while you're trying to sleep. One night I take the trash out and see what appears to be a dude staring at me from within the dumpster. I chuck the trash and run away, but then look back, and it was a balloon. I was 17 and was hanging out with my friend at her place watching movies. It was dark when I headed home. A couple of houses down there was a party going on, and as I walked out to my car some guys were outside and around their truck with the lights on and music playing, and they called out and catcalled me. I ignored them and started heading home. They pulled out behind me and I hoped they were going somewhere else, but as I continued towards home they stayed behind me. I was living with my parents, around a half-hour drive away from town out in the country. As I pulled onto the country roads the truck was still behind and I was really scared. I knew the roads well and put my foot down, hoping I could lose them, but they stayed on my tail. I reached my driveway, which was quite long, up a hill and round a corner, and floored it home. I ran inside and told my dad, who stood outside waiting to see if they'd come up the driveway. It was a still night and we couldn't see the road from our house, but we could hear the truck engine idling. They eventually drove away. Thinking about it now, there are all sorts of things I should have done differently, but I guess I was too scared to think straight. Out hiking in the Atlas Mountains near my family's farm, some guy jumped out in front of me with 2 huge machetes. I had the dogs with me, so just kept walking and staring at me. This was back in 2008. Some women a few years ago were killed in the same mountains by 4 men who used knives to stab them. I am a former inspector and have been in a lot of different situations. Because I was often the first guy in an investigation, I got used to seeing weird stuff. By far the scariest is when I was on a call in a tiny town in Texas where I had to sit in complete darkness and watch a gas station suspected of illegal dealings. I was on a dirt road and saw a light about 40 yards ahead of me. I figured it was a lamppost and kept an eye on the target. As daybreak neared, I began driving back to the field office to submit my findings and drove up to what I suspected was a lamppost. It turned out to be a guy holding an electric lantern, wearing dark overalls and looking down at a human hand laying on the ground. I called it in and later found out that the guy had a few hands in his freezer and went to take them to the trash and dropped one. Upon realizing he dropped a severed human hand, he went into shock and stood there for hours. My name is Yoshikaga Kira. I'm 33 years old. My house is in the northeast section of Morio, where all the villas are, and I am not married. I work as an employee for the KMU department stores, and I get home every day by 8 p.m. at the latest. I don't smoke, but I occasionally drink. I'm in bed by 11 p.m., and make sure I get 8 hours of sleep, no matter what. After having a glass of warm milk and doing about 20 minutes of stretches before going to bed, I usually have no problem sleeping until morning. Just like a baby, I wake up without any fatigue or stress in the morning. I was told there were no issues at my last checkup. I'm trying to explain that I'm a person who wishes to live a very quiet life. I take care not to trouble myself with any enemies, like winning and losing, that would cause me to lose sleep at night. That is how I deal with society, and I know that is what brings me happiness. Although, if I were to fight I wouldn't lose to anyone. One night at around 11 p.m. I was watching TV when my doorbell rang. I opened the door and there was this girl that looked around mid-late 20s that looked distressed, saying she had an argument with her mom and asked if I could call her a taxi where she would wait for it at the top of the road. I closed the door and called the taxi and waited around to see what would happen. Minutes later I get a text from the taxi company saying they couldn't find anyone. I feel sorry for the driver, and I hear the girl doing the exact same thing to my neighbor. Then that was it. Never saw or heard from her again. She only did it to one neighbor, not the other 6 houses on my street. To this day I have no reason what happened or what she was doing. I'm schizophrenic, so I've experienced plenty of scary things and many don't faze me as much anymore, but one hallucination I've had since my symptoms first began will forever terrify me. The first time I saw him I was 15. He's tall, wears a worn-down gray suit, and has no face. You're probably picturing Slender Man right now, and that's about as close of an image there is. First encounter was just him at a distance for all of a minute before he disappeared. Over the years he slowly got closer to me. When I was 20 I went into a psychosis episode and then fell asleep after calming down. When I woke up he was standing right next to me, looming over my bed. I cried for hours because that's the closest he'd ever been. In December I was hospitalized again, and during my stay he touched me. Just one very cold hand on my shoulder before leaving again. I felt bad for my roommate at the hospital because when she saw me draw him out as a coping skill, she thought it was a demon and asked to change rooms because she believed I was cursed. Haven't seen him in months, thankfully. One of my friends asked me to watch her pet lizard while she was gone on vacation for the summer. So one day, I'm walking over to her house to do my thing. When I get to her driveway, I see there's a white van sitting in there that I didn't recognize. I could clearly see there was someone in the driver's seat waiting for something, so I just quickly walked past it to the front door. By the time I was done doing my thing, the van was still sitting in the driveway. I decided I would just get home as fast as possible. So I triple-checked that I locked the front door and began walking. As soon as I started walking onto the sidewalk, the van turned on, pulled out of the driveway and started following close behind me with its headlights on. I started to worry but just decided to walk faster. Van started speeding up. Walked even faster. Van sped up. Now I was pretty scared, so I pulled out my phone, looked at it and made a confused expression with my hands to make it look like I just realized I was late for something. Then I started running as fast as I could in the direction of my house. The van started speeding after me. I didn't stop running or look back until I fell onto my driveway. I then saw the van slowly climbing up my street, but when it was about halfway up my street, it stopped and turned around. My neighbors were out watering their lawns and such that day, so I assume they left because of that. In my old house, every time I changed clothes in my room I always caught a glimpse of my door opening. Whenever I turned to see if it was open I always caught it as it was closing. Whenever it closed it was almost like unreal on how fast the door swung. I would have locked the door, but my old room never had any door locks, even my bathroom door, so now in the new place I live in, I always lock my door and change in my closet. Those experiences also have me paranoid that I'm being watched whenever I'm using the bathroom or just doing random things. Half the time I catch myself looking around to see if someone is actually there. I always felt like I wasn't alone or being watched in my family's house when I was alone or late at night. It creeped me out so much that I slept with my closet door closed, blocked by stuff, till I graduated high school. In my senior year around midnight my sister jumped off the second story of the house, her first suicide attempt, while on the phone with 911 and trying to keep her conscious until the ambulance showed up. The 911 operator had me ask her why she did it. Her response was, "It made me." Still fucks me up till this day, and I never sleep well in that house ever again. There was other stuff that happened there, but too much to type it all over my phone. Update: since more people requested more info, here you go. So the piano downstairs would play music but would stop if you got halfway downstairs. The radio and TV would turn themselves on. My dog would sit at the end of the upstairs hallway and defend bark at nothing, except one time after my sister's attempt I saw a shadow figure enter my mom's bedroom at the end of the hallway. My sister's room was directly across the hall where it seemed to come from. Once my mom and I saw a face made of light on the wall, After blocking all light to it and it still glowed, my mom freaked out and dragged me out of the house. The last time I stayed in that house I was with my husband and while doing stuff to help me sleep in my sister's old room, and we saw this shadow figure about the size of a ceiling fan spread out with almost spider-like limbs still on the ceiling while the middle dropped down toward the bed, then it zoomed out the window. Same one my sister jumped from. So we decided nope, never again, and next year my parents sold the home and moved. Update: my sister is alive and well for those who messaged me about her. Also creepy things she did was stand over my bed staring at me, yep, just like in Paranormal Activity, so the movie scared the shit out of me. I ended up locked my bedroom door at night because of her. I also went downstairs one night after midnight cause I had a cold and couldn't fall asleep, so thought I'd make sleepy time tea. But my sis was just standing still in the middle of the kitchen, back to me, no lights on, so I noped out of there back to my room. My mom thought she saw people in the house once and came home a few times to all the lights on. Mom has OCD, so we were raised to turn off lights when leaving a room. My dad would hear people talking like they were downstairs, but when he called out the talking would stop. He also had the radio flip channels when he was alone. And last but not least, my sister-in-law stayed over one night, says she didn't sleep at all cause she swore she could hear screaming from my closet in my old bedroom. Not me but my mom. We took a family trip to Ireland a while back. I was only a baby so I don't remember this. For context purposes, here are the people that attended: mom, dad, aunt, uncle, cousin, boy, cousin, girl, grandma and grandpa. My cousin, boy, is extremely tall, so most everyone had fallen asleep one night except for my mom. She had a really bad stomach ache and couldn't fall asleep. When she got back into bed and closed her eyes, she heard something on the other side of the room. She sat up in bed and saw a dark figure in the doorway. She got nervous but soon realized it was just my cousin boy. She sleepily told him to go to bed and that she couldn't talk at the moment. In the morning she asks him what he wanted to talk about so late in the night. He told her that he fell asleep at 9 and never left his room. She got creeped out but didn't say anything because she didn't want to worry him. Later that day in the afternoon, she overheard my aunt and the house owner of the place we were staying at talking to each other. They were talking about the owner's son who had passed away a few years ago. She said he looked a lot like my cousin but a bit taller. My mom's eyes grew wide and she listened in. The woman said that her son had passed away from a lawnmower accident and she was devastated. My mom suddenly realized that the man she saw in the door wasn't my cousin, it was that boy. The boy she saw in the doorway was wearing a ripped-up button-up t-shirt that my cousin didn't own, and he was making weird growling noises when she was talking to him. I only heard this story recently as my mom didn't want to creepy me out when I was younger. I grew up in a remote northern European village. We were frequently taken to the village's old playground by the nuns when we were in kindergarten. The swing was quite popular and we usually up and took turns at it. There was a girl in a long dress swinging for what seemed to be ages, so I asked her to let me swing. She didn't reply, so I asked one of the nuns to tell her off. I got detention because apparently the swing was empty. I wasn't the only one who saw her. When I was a child I had waking nightmares with demonic entities, often the same demonic entity. It's obviously pretty horrifying waking up, or rather, thinking you have woken up, and having the strange feeling that you are being watched, then looking around the room with your eyes wide open and spotting a horrifying entity with decaying, demonic features in the room, and then having it slowly advance toward you. Often this would happen while dealing with sleep paralysis, too, so I couldn't move or scream. I also heard a loud, frightening and ghostly moaning noise in the basement of my empty house when I was a kid, which was presumably some sort of noise in a pipe, but sounded like someone in the room with me loudly moaning at me. I only ever heard it the one time, though I spent a lot of time in our basement, which housed our ping pong table and an area in which I could practice skateboard tricks on rainy days. On a different note, being lonely to the point that I could die for most of the last 6+ years is far worse than any spooky stuff. That's a different type of horror story, I guess. Also, if you fear death, the death anxiety prompted by the certainty of death can be quite bad and is maybe the worst feeling that I've ever experienced, slightly worse than the grief at the loss of a loved one, even. Also, having one's body age can be difficult, sad and frightening. 2 nights ago I had an encounter that really unnerved me even though nothing really happened. I was out late at night smoking some weed. To get home I cut across this field. The field is this large mound sort of hill in the middle. Walking home I noticed a man's silhouette at the top of the hill. When I got closer he turned on what appeared to be a headlamp. He stood facing me and started shaking some small bag, intermittently making a rattling sound. I was confused and made a wide berth around the hill. When I circled around to the opposite side he was still facing me and had moved closer to my side of the hill and still shaking the bag. I took my phone out and was ready to dial 911 immediately if he took another step closer. I saw a couple with a big dog in the distance and made a beeline to them. I'm not normally afraid of people, but that guy was just so weird it threw me off. Not me, but my mother. My mom lived in Scarborough, Ontario in the late 1980s. She went out one evening in 1987 and went to a store. When she got out of the store it was dark, and as she walked to her car she was overcome by fear and she ran to her vehicle, unlocked it, and jumped in and locked the doors. Just as she locked the doors, a man was at her driver's side door and trying to get in. She said he smiled at her and just walked away calmly. She drove home, told my dad about it, and then thought, that was really weird, but didn't call the police or anything. Years later, she saw him on TV. He had been arrested for rape and murder of 3 teenage girls, Tammy Homolka, Leslie Mahaffey, and Kristen French. He was also charged with the rape of many women in the Scarborough area of Toronto. This didn't actually happen directly to me but a friend of mine. But I was still involved in the situation and it's a decent story, so hey, whatever. To set the scene, my friend and I were 15 or 16 at the time this happened. It was a summer night, probably around midnight. We were chatting on AIM or something, early 2000s lol, and he said he was gonna walk over to my place and hang out. He lived on the same street as me, a few houses down. The area we lived was kind of rural, so that was still a 15-minute walk down and around a bend in the road. There were no sidewalks or streetlights or anything, just woods on either side of the street. But it was a walk we both made all the time at all hours of the day and night. So he says he's on his way, and after a while I'm starting to get a little worried about him because a good 30 minutes goes by and he still isn't there. I call him a couple times and he doesn't answer. I'm thinking, what the hell, man, when he finally pounds on my door and comes in all sweaty and out of breath and tells me what took him so long. He had walked about halfway when a van coming up the road the opposite direction slowed down as it passed him and then pulled into a driveway and started turning around. He got freaked out and veered off into the woods and ducked behind some bushes or a tree or something and hid there, while the van driver proceeded to go back and forth up and down the street shining some kind of spotlight into the woods looking for my friend. They eventually gave up and drove off, and my buddy sprinted the rest of the way to my house and stayed the night. He never reported it to anybody, and as far as I know no one else saw or experienced anything similar in the area, but we were both pretty freaked out walking around there late at night for a while. Last year, I went through a whole bunch of health trouble, mostly related to a tumor and a destructive relationship with alcohol. I was throwing up pretty constantly and not able to keep any food down. Ended up with a B1 deficiency. Turns out, B1 is in pretty much everything you eat, and it's there for a reason. My legs stopped working, my fingers and hands were completely numb, my nerves were basically screaming. Worst part was the mental degradation. I had no idea what was real, had nightmares that followed me into the waking world, thought everyone, including my own mother, was out to get me. I still remember waking up thinking I just watched my little brother die in my arms, and even seeing him alive and well did nothing to convince me. Scariest thing about it is that if it had gone untreated for much longer, it could have been permanent. So yeah, take your vitamins. When I was a kid, 7 or 8 I think, I used to sleep in my dad's bed when I was scared. One morning I woke up quite early, like 6 a.m., and it was still pretty dark. I just decided to go downstairs to get the day started. When I came down to the living room, there was this giant silhouette of a bear sitting right around the corner. When I saw it, I kind of froze in place for a second or two and just started yelling, "Ah, bear." As fast as I could I ran up the stairs, taking like 2/3 steps at a time. Then in my dad's room, I crawled under the sheets with tears in my eyes. I was absolutely terrified. Turned out it was a stuffed animal bear, 2 meters big, my dad bought. Every 2 weeks he picked the best performing judoka and gave them the bear for 2 weeks. A bit like a motivational thing. Not me personally really, but my dad stopped a school shooting. I remember coming home from 2nd grade an hour early and my mom not explaining why, only saying, "You'll see when we turn in the news." It was pretty cool in my little kid mind that my dad was on TV, that he was a hero. Now I realize he could have died that day. Pretty insane stuff. Me and my friend were once on the street skateboarding, and a tall, like almost 7 feet, man walked up to us all in black and carrying a suitcase. He walked up to us and just stopped walking until we started skateboarding again. He carried on walking and stopped when we would. We were only 13 at the time and it was really creepy. He then just stood at the end of the street staring at us. We ran inside and he was gone. Both of us swear by this exact story almost 6 years later. Did a little seance in the new house as a kid, like 6 to 7 years old, with the neighbor girl. Dad's side of the fam is religious, so I had this little glass crucifix and we decided to walk around the house exiling the ghosts or whatever. I don't even think we made it out of the computer room before the bottom of the cross broke off and shattered onto the wooden floor. I attended college in a wealthy city notorious for keeping homeless people out. One late night, my roommates and I were returning from campus when we decided to stop by McDonald's to grab something to eat. This MCD was near a grocery store and a few other shops, so there was this huge, empty parking lot. It was near midnight when we pulled up to the MCD. The whole parking lot was empty except for a man wandering around. It was highly unusual for someone to be walking around that late in this town, and I was having uneasy feelings about it. But I thought I was overreacting and didn't mention anything to my roommates. After we got our food, my roommate left the MCD and started driving through the empty parking lot to exit. My other roommate was asleep in the front passenger seat while I sat behind her in the back. I was distracted for a few seconds and didn't realize my roommate was driving right towards this strange man. Suddenly, my gut instinct told me to look up, and I did. My roommate had literally stopped the car to stare at this man, who was standing right next to the front passenger door. I made eye contact with the man and his face was just rotten. Just like the zombies in the movies that were decaying. I stared into this man's eyes and there was no life. He stared back at me with his eyes widened and slightly tilting his head to the side. The man reached for the passenger door, which was unlocked. I yelled at my roommate to step on the gas, who was in a phase at the time. He finally snapped out of it and sped out of there. As we exit the parking lot, I turned back to look at the man one last time and he was just watching us drive away. When we got back to our apartment, my roommate and I talked about what we saw. We both agreed he had a rotten, decaying face, but we couldn't find a logical explanation to what we saw. He could have been a homeless man, but I still can't shake off what I saw. The way he was walking around in the parking lot was so zombie-like. He didn't look like a living human being. The thought of his eyes and rotting face still give me the chills to this day. I don't know if this is considered a horror story, but I lived with some family for a year. I've been looking for a place to live and they wanted me to rent a house with them, and I got the bedroom in the basement. Almost the whole time I would hear like somebody crying in the laundry room next to my room, and I thought it was the TV in the bedroom above me that was always on. Well, I asked them if they could please turn the TV when they aren't there because it sounds like a muffled crying sound. So like another week passes and I said, can you please turn the TV on if it keeps sounding like somebody's crying downstairs and it's just creeping me out. They looked me right in the eye and said I have had the TV off. In fact, I haven't been home for 2 days with the TV off. I used to always see what looks like a black cat out of the corner of my eye, and there were 2 cats there, but neither of them were black. I find out that the woman who lived there before died in the house, and she had a black cat that passed away within a year before. Not me, but my dad. He grew up in small-town Kansas in the 70s. One day when he was 5 or 6, she saw a man's face in his window in the middle of the night. The next morning he told his mom and dad, and they said, no, you aren't a little girl. Those things only happen to girls. This happened every week for months, and my dad was convinced he was seeing a ghost. He even made faces at the guy, who made them back. He at one point tried to get my dad to open the window, but dad wouldn't. This went on until it snowed and my grandpa went to the backyard only to find footprints in the snow leading up to dad's window. I don't know what happened after that, but the nighttime visits stopped. Pretty short, but still scary. So about 7 years ago I was in my parents' house with my siblings and they had to leave for my grandpa's funeral. After 15 minutes we expected them to be back as they told us, but they didn't come back and neither did they answer their phone calls. Moments later some crazy crawls up on my balcony, first floor, and starts banging out of the glass door. I grabbed my phone and just hoped they would answer, and they did. The man kept humping the glass and screaming until my dad came in with a pistol and shot him dead. He told us we would have to move since he knew that guy and a bunch of people would be coming soon. Before we left the house, I saw the guy moving his head to stare at me with his brains out exposed. After we moved into the new house, I kept having nightmares about that guy, and soon enough we got attacked by 3 people in masks. I had to hide behind a desk while Dad fought for his life. He came back telling us it would be okay, with bruises and scratches all over him. We moved to Germany and bought a house while Dad searched for a job. I live normally but cannot get that picture of the guy staring me right in the eye out of my head. When I was a fairly new police officer, I and another officer get sent to an ascertain the problem investigation. Basically, a neighbor called and said there was loud screaming, banging, and yelling coming from apartment number 3. We get there and walk down a long alley to the apartments. As we approach the apartment in question, a lady comes walking out. I was in complete shock for about 5 seconds and seriously thought I was seeing something in a B-slasher movie. In her left hand, she was holding a decapitated female's head, which was dripping blood from it. I later learned the girl was 9 years old. In her right hand, she was holding a butcher's knife, also covered in blood. It took me several seconds to comprehend. Once I woke up and yelled at her, she dropped the head and it bounced around, almost like a soccer ball. We get her hooked up and go to clear the apartment. The apartment looked like something out of a horror movie. Blood was everywhere, and as I walked into the back bedroom, I slipped and fell into it. Totally covered me in my uniform. I ended up throwing it away. In the back bedroom was a 7-year-old male, also decapitated. I was actually physically ill after seeing this crime scene, although not the worst I have seen. It has been over 30 years since this occurred and I still have flashbacks/nightmares. The lady? The kid's grandmother is currently on death row in California, although the death penalty there has been retracted. My stepmom would wake up screaming in the middle of the night for years after she married my dad. She said there was a figure hovering over her on her side of the bed. Wasn't until recently I made the connection that my birth mother died in that bed on the side my stepmom sleeps on. 2 stories, one more on the supernatural kind of side and the other is serious and may not be for sensitive readers. The shadow man who comes when I used to have sleep paralysis. I had it several times. The first 2 I was creeped out. Once I had 2 dogs jump around my bed playing, which I felt that one was my dog which died and his friend. Although I couldn't move, I wasn't scared of the dogs, their energy was friendly. About then, at some point when I had the sleep paralysis, out of the corner of my eye I'd catch a glimpse of the shadow man. He was always just out of sight enough for me not to see him completely, but I knew he was there. One time he came close and put his hand on my shoulder, and when I regained movement and woke up properly from the sleep paralysis I could still feel where his hand was put on my shoulder. However, I never got a bad vibe from him. There was another time I was having one of those false awakening dreams and I actually managed to catch him. I remember I was so frustrated, and when I did catch him I shook him by the front of his black outfit, asking him what he wanted from me. He just laughed, and though I couldn't exactly see his face, I felt it. And he said nothing. He didn't want to hurt me or anything like that, and he didn't visit after that and the dreams stopped. There was one time I was walking late home after having an argument with my ex. We lived together, and I was attacked by 3 men, one of which had a long rusty-looking machete. They got my phone, money and MP3 player, and they also started groping me and started dragging me to a bushed area across the road. There were no cars on the road, and honestly I was stupid for thinking it'd just walk it. I thought that it'd probably end up like one girl who was found dead not far from there, and the only thing I was thinking about was that rusty machete. I started talking in order to see if I could appeal to them, like I was pregnant and that I was sick and they'd get sick too if they did anything with me, and we got to those bushes and they did the unspeakable, and I kept talking and crying till one of them seemed to get worried by what I was saying and got his 2 accomplices to let me go. They even gave me back my SIM card and told me to go on my way, and that after this particular spot no one else would attack me. I walked back to the road, and ran to the closest apartment complex, knocked over and over till a security guard opened up, and I explained the situation and asked to use the phone. I called my then boyfriend to pick me and that I was robbed. I didn't tell him anything else that happened and asked him to grab a cab, and I was specific about that. He said fine. After about an hour I called him again because it shouldn't have taken him that long to get to me. He said he grabbed a friend and walked, and they were chased by 3 guys, one of which had a machete. I nearly lost my mind because how stupid could he be? I told him to grab a cab and pick me up and he never came. I chilled with the security guards till about 5:30 a.m. who asked me to wait for their security vehicle with the next shift to come and that they'd take me home. It's funny how the only thing I was thinking about was that those guys even stole my last cigarette cause I could have really used one. When I got home I found the ex passed out as we were drinking previously. I got my spare phone, made some calls, went to the police station to report the incident and then the hospital for tests and needed medication and counseling. It took me a long time to really process the situation, and I think I only relaxed after some time when follow-up tests gave me a clean bill of health. My ex never went with me or talked to me about that night, and though it was like 8 to 9 years ago, I still get startled when someone comes up behind me suddenly, especially on my right side because that's where I turned right before I was attacked. I decided to try acid with some friends for shits and giggles. This was their second or third time on the substance and my first. I was given a gel tab, about 300 UG, to be taken. The come up was fine, but then I reached the peak immediately. Everything in my body was telling me to leave, to run away and to get out of there. I locked myself in the bathroom and was hearing voices screaming at me about all my insecurities. I remember crying for a bit, then nothing for what felt like hours. I left the bathroom and only 10 minutes had passed. I went to the couch to have a conversation with my friends, or at least try to. I talked to one of them for a couple minutes before heading upstairs to find the rest of my friends. After about 20 to 30 minutes I told my friends we should go check on the guy downstairs. They told me Logan nobody was downstairs. Confused at first I responded no. I remember, then followed by silence, but they were right there confused. They asked what I was talking about and I told them nothing and just kept it to myself to not ruin their trip, but that still haunts me to this day. Yeah man, acid is no joke. If everything goes well, it's one hell of a time. A great bonding experience with friends, or a good chance at introspection. If it's bad, it's bad. I've never had a bad trip, since stopped, but my first time tripping, we had a group of 6 of us drop. Also gel tabs, funnily enough. For 5 of us, the trip was insanely fun. For the 6th, nah, he had done it a few times at least, and his come up was mostly fine. But while on the come up he decided to smoke a ton of weed, as it helps the visuals. When all of our peaks started to hit, he went bonkers. There's a lot of details I'm leaving out here, but we did this on a November night where the temp dropped about 40 degrees from midday to nighttime, and so an insane amount of fog rolled in. He stepped outside to get some fresh air and without knowing about the fog, proceeded to lose his shit. He thought he was now out of his body, so he went to bang on the neighbor's garage for help at like midnight. Just wailing away. When we finally wrangled him inside, he calmed down to the point of sitting and chatting. He asked to go to the bathroom. When he came out, he was completely naked and soaking wet and started to freak out. He finally came to not long after, but being 20 and in such a shot situation, I'm surprised it didn't ruin everyone else's trip. When I was maybe 3 or 4 years old, I woke up to my bedroom door being fully open and a black figure just standing there. It was maybe 5 feet, 2 meters, tall. It didn't even look non-human. I thought it was my dad for some reason and I started to scream "Dad?" over and over. The figure didn't even move or disappear. Since it was a long time ago I don't remember what happened afterwards, but I will never forget it. Maybe it was a dream? It felt super real though. My grandparents had an old house that they bought in 1950. I grew up hearing stories about weird things that happened around the house. One night when I was 12 I was at their house alone. I didn't want to sleep upstairs in the bedrooms because sometimes I would hear footsteps and feel like someone was standing at the foot of my bed watching me. So I lay down on the couch downstairs. As soon as I closed my eyes I heard music coming from upstairs. Sad, creepy music. I got up, turned on the lights and proceeded to go around to every room and check them. I checked the TVs, radios, anything that may make noise. I went outside and checked around the house. Nothing. I shut off the lights and as soon as I closed my eyes I heard the music start again, and then right next to my ear I heard someone say my name. I jumped up, flicked on the lights, grabbed my shoes and ran to my friend's house down the street. Her father wasn't too happy with me banging on the door at 12:30 a.m. but I was not going back there alone. As I got older I learned to ignore feelings and sounds. Eventually I chalked it up to a child's imagination. Until my son started having the same experiences. When we'd visit he'd stay in my old bedroom and he'd ask me the next day, "Why did you keep walking down the hall and then just come in my room and stare at me?" Or "Why did you keep calling my name and waking me up?" After that I did something really stupid. I was at their house and couldn't sleep, so I was watching movies. The room I was staying in was also my grandmother's office. She wrote short stories and had over 200 published, so there was a computer, paper, pens and a voice recorder. I had just watched White Noise and it was around 3 a.m. I looked over and saw the voice recorder and thought, I grabbed it and went out on the back porch. I sat there for a minute and thought, if any neighbors get up and see me they are going to think I'm crazy. So I went and sat in my car. I started recording and saying things like, is there anyone there? Does anyone want to say anything? If anyone is there, speak. I rewound it. You can hear me kinda laughing, and after I say speak there is about 30 seconds of dead air. Then the creepiest voice in an evil tone says spiak. I noped out of the car, ran inside, turned on all the lights and woke my grandmother up. I played it for her and she said, why would you do that? I've told you never to mess with things like that. I didn't sleep for weeks. I still have the recording and it still gives me chills. I've actually had a lot of weird, scary things happen to me throughout my life. I don't know if it's ghost, different dimensions, aliens. Who knows? I don't mess around with things anymore. I'm good not knowing. My most memorable sleep paralysis episode was sleeping in bed on my back. I felt a cold, clammy hand reach up through my bed, as if from behind me, and slowly make its way to my neck. The hand took its sweet ass time getting comfortable, gently feeling around etc. Once it seemed satisfied as to where it was, it grabbed my neck and started slowly squeezing harder and harder. I finally snapped out at gasping for breath and my heart racing, along with all the typical pure liquid fearfulness associated with sleep paralysis. Worth noting, this wasn't my first bout with sleep paralysis, but at the time I hadn't heard of the term. For years I believed I was haunted. This added to that belief. I'd if that counts as creepypasta. A family fiend calls her son who live across the country. No answer. There is a lot of reason why someone wouldn't pick up the phone. Forgot it, it's on mute, he's asleep. But something didn't felt right. She jumped on her car and traveled to her son's place in a few hours to find him passed out from an overdose. Thankfully she was on time to call for help and save him. Without her, he's be a goner. Please hear me out. This is out there and I am not entirely convinced it happened myself, but the evidence seems to say otherwise. I've actually started therapy last year to help with what has happened to me over the years. Now there is a lot to unpack, so if you have any questions I'll be happy to answer, but please don't just come out and call me a liar or crazy or anything derogatory, because it does not help in finding out what really happened to me. The first thing I remember happening to me was when I was a young child. I would see shadow figures with different colored eye peeking at me from the top of my closet. I would always be in bed and cover myself up as soon as I knew they were there. They weren't down low where say a child's eyes would be, and they would always only peep out from behind the baseboards on the sides of the closet doors. The eyes would be up high, higher than any human being. So look at a doorway in your house and look at the top corner of it. That's where they would peep out from and look at me. Always same spot. Only thing that changed was their eye color. Nothing too creepy, but for a 5 or 6 year old it was terrifying enough. I would also wake up to these lights in my room. Very much like searchlights but in a very small form. Shining through the windows. That only happened once or twice though, but it still scared me a bit. A few years pass and I move into my parents' basement, as I basically lived down there anyway. Had my own space and own bedroom and nice big basement to myself most of the time. A couple nights though I woke up outside my house. Always in my boxers, and on one occasion it was the middle of winter during a winter storm. I was freezing. This is where it starts to get kinda weird and I apologize in advance. I woke up one morning to my friend waking me up because I was late to hang out with him that day. I slept through my alarm and didn't answer phone, so he just came over. He came in my room and woke me up and instantly said, "Dude, what are you bleeding?" I got up and kinda looked around at what he was talking about. I had white pillowcases and when I picked it up there was a bloody handprint clear as day on it. But when I put my hand up to the handprint it definitely was not mine. The fingers were way too thin and a lot longer. But no other blood, no drops, no dried blood on me. Anywhere. We decided to go out and hang out and try and figure it out, and the best thing we thought of was that I had a bloody nose during the night and wiped it in the pillow, but the hands didn't match up, so we kinda were dumbfounded. Same year I kept having these very realistic dreams. I would dream of myself in a hallway sitting on a cold metal bench. Naked. The walls were clouds? Best way I could describe it. You could touch them and poke through them, but there was something there that made a wall. During this dream a door would slowly open and I would see a shadow of 3 beings, and I would always wake up drenched in sweat. About a year later I was at a pool party for one of my best friend's birthday. We were all hanging out by the pool and laying in tanning chairs and stuff, listening to music and having fun. When I got out of pool and sat in chair to relax, I noticed a weird bump in my left arm. It didn't hurt, it didn't have any redness or bruising or anything, but there was definitely something there. So I started to squeeze it. It took quite a bit of squeezing and a lot of pressure, but all of a sudden this thing just blooped out. It was weird. It didn't pop like as it and actually pop and blood and whatnot. It just kinda slowly blooped out of my skin with no blood on it or coming from where it came out of. The hole basically sealed behind it coming out. It didn't make sense, so I grabbed the thing and it was globe-shaped. It was black and gray. But gray being lines that moved through this thing almost in a pattern. Best I can describe it as it looked like a black and gray basketball. But tiny. About the size of a large pea. I was stumped. Too scared to show my friends and too scared to tell my parents about it. Back then we didn't have Google or cell phones, and I really didn't even know where to begin on how to investigate what has been happening to me. After that very strange year, things settled down for quite a while, some strange things here and there but nothing too out of the ordinary. Until this last summer. Last summer I started seeing the shadow figures again, but this time they weren't in my room when I was going to sleep, but around in my backyard when I took the dogs out, or even across the street while I sit on the porch and smoke cigarettes. It happened for a week or two, but nothing too scary or anything I could handle, until September 1st of this year at about 3 to 4 a.m. I had an experience I will never forget. Night started out fine. Playing games with my son, and my wife was on nights so she was at work. My son slept in mine and my wife's bed with me that night, along with the 2 dogs at the sides of the bed, so went to sleep and woke up and turned over to look at the clock, and when I turned my body over I was frozen with fear. I saw the time was 3:18, but as I was looking at that I could see a static, muscular being's legs and part of its arm in my view of the alarm clock and bed. This very distinct repetitive thud was happening too. Thud, tr-tr thud, thud, tr-tr thud, thud. For some reason the next thing I knew I was on my back and I could see this being now. I went to go grab my son and get out of there, but I realized I couldn't move. I could feel the tears in my eyes falling down the sides of my face, and I tried screaming with all my might but nothing came out. That's when I heard a voice very robotic, say, "We are not going to hurt you or your son, everything will be fine." As weird and scary as it was actually kinda soothing. It felt like an old friend talking to me, but when I looked down to see what this creature was doing made me even more scared. This creature stood at least 7 or 8 feet tall, and at the time the only thing I could describe him as was a huge ant being. But with lobster-like hands. Very muscular, and his color was a dark orange or light brown. He also had this wave of white energy surrounding him everywhere. He was doing something with my left arm. Waving it up and down with his hands. Very gently, but moving his hands up and down my arm while also waving it up and down, if that makes any sense, lol. It lasted about 5 or 6 minutes but felt like a lifetime. I woke up and everything was back to normal. Checked my son so fucking fast and he was fast asleep. Checked the dogs and they were on the ground sleeping too. The weird thing about this night too is that I'm a night hawk. I was having fun at night playing video games and my son and dogs were being super cute together, so I started taking a million pictures of them. Those pics have timestamps. I start at 12:11 a.m. and took at least 7 or 8 pictures of them for the next 2 or 3 hours. Then my camera goes blank for about an hour, no pics starting around 3:05 am. Then I started taking pics again at 4:30 am. But then I looked at my arm. My arm was a mess. There was this massive bump under my skin with 2 small puncture marks beside the lump. It felt like a bad bruise, but something definitely in there. I didn't freak out, as by this time I was actually talking to my therapist about my past experiences, and I was actually going to see her on the Monday coming up. We are still trying to figure out what is actually happening, but with the power of the internet and Google we have a pretty good idea. That being in my room we found out was not actually an ant but a mantis being. Their heads look very similar. Just a tiny piece in this puzzle we have solved for now, but in reality I don't think we're ever going to solve this one. Nothing has happened to me since that night. I actually tried digging out whatever was put, or taken out, of my arm with no success. I know I'm gonna get a lot of flack and yay your bullshit comments from this story, but that's totally up to you to decide for yourself. If anything has ever happened to you that is similar to my story, I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. Not me, but my ma. When my mom was pregnant with me, she dreamt about being pushed on the track of the train. She got up and looked at the time before heading back to sleep. Next morning, she saw on the news a teenager was pushed onto train tracks the previous night around 11 p.m. Same time my mom had the dream and woke up, and it happened at the same station. Story 2. Also my ma. It was the late 90s Hong Kong, don't remember what year. She was a newbie at her job, first day. She showed up 15 minutes earlier to work thinking better early than late. About 5 minutes or so, she heard screams and shootings, looked out the window and saw one rookie cop hiding behind a car holding his 6-shooter while with 3 robbers or so with fully automatic rifles sprayed everywhere while more were in a bank or jewelry store, don't remember, robbing it. A lot of passerby were hit with stray bullets. If my mom showed up later or on time, she would have been hit by one of the bullets. Last year I was walking around my neighborhood at around 11 p.m. and a car kept slowly following me up my street for about 10 minutes. They just kept driving by me and U-turning. As soon as I had 911 dialed and was ready to call, a cop car pulled up. I went up to it and told her that I was being followed and pointed to the car. She pulled them over and I got out of there. Was either dumb teenagers or some real sinister shit. I was ready to fight whoever stepped out of the car. And I'm not even necessarily easy prey, being 6 feet 2 inches and 175 pounds. I wonder if someone else had called the cops because they noticed the suspicious car, or if I just got extremely lucky. It was late at night so I might have seriously just been lucky. That was the first time I've ever been happy to see a cop in my life. Had to watch kids' talent show for hours because I had to change the lights at the right time and cue the music at the right time, so I had to be at least semi-sober to watch that live torture. A female friend of mine was murdered by her ex while I was in prison. I had no idea at the time. When I got out, I went looking for my friend because I owed her some apologies for some grimy things, but her numbers didn't work and I couldn't find her. I went on Google and discovered that some man had found out she kept money at home and decided to rob her. They had also decided that if she was home, they would have to kill her to prevent her from testifying. She was home. They stabbed and suffocated her and she died in terror and fear. That's not the creepy part. Fast forward a couple of years and I, having not learned much, am headed back to prison. As I'm waiting in the transfer cell with another 6 or 7 guys for our van to transport us to Denver, an all-day ordeal. None of us know one another, and we do the usual jail thing of summing up our current charges. I did mine, stupidly minor, drug dealing, and then the next guy takes his turn, and says I killed a girl while I was robbing her. I spent the afternoon in the cell, and later, next to him chained up in the transfer van, listening to him tell the story in great detail. I wish I had had the courage to kill him. I would feel worse about that if he hadn't been 20 years younger, 50 pounds heavier, and multiple murder convictions more formidable than I was. I would have gotten kicked and extra prison time, at best, but I still wish I had tried. Instead I just listened, and took as many showers as I could for a while, but it was a long time before I felt clean. Walking home alone at night, followed all the way through the Times Square station and eventually assaulted by a mentally ill person. Back then it was all tunnels and late at night. You very well could be the only person walking through them as you transferred from one train to another. I heard the footsteps echoing behind me but thought I was just being paranoid. I was not. I was on holiday with my family in Portugal. This was around the same time as the Madeleine McCann thing happened, for anyone who knows about that. I was about 7 at the time and my older cousin was about 9 and I really looked up to him. We were at a Birds of Prey show with all of these different birds on different platforms. This guy announced a guest and it was a middle-aged guy in a clown suit. It was all just a regular clown routine. My cousin said he was afraid of clowns, and me being curious I asked why. He told me the story of Pennywise the clown from IT and explained that was why he was afraid of clowns. At the time I laughed it off but was pretty nervous of clowns all of a sudden. We left the show and began walking to a toilet/restroom just outside of the show area. My dad asked me at the time if I needed to go really quick and I said no thanks. I just wanted to go and do the next thing, even though I really did kinda need it. I waited outside with my mum and we all as a family afterwards walked to a restaurant that was quite far away, like the other side of the park. We sat down at the tables in that restaurant and my mum went up to order food. The line was huge and we started waiting for 15 minutes or so. So my dad went up to help mum get the food. Just before he left the table with me and my cousins I asked if I could go to the bathroom. He sighed because he literally asked just a minute ago but said sure. Now as a 7-year-old child I didn't automatically look around the restaurant for the toilet. I proceeded to walk all the way myself back across the park to where the restroom was outside the bird of prey area. When I went in it was very busy from people presumably just out of another showing of this birds of prey thing. I waited for ages for a stall and when there was one I went in. When I came out the man from the show in the clown suit was there. He hadn't removed anything, he might have been on break or something, I'm not sure. I having this new fear of mine and being alone was terrified. I went up to the sink and began using it and immediately left the restroom. But as I left I saw the colors follow me. I then ran around multiple corners and continued to go as fast as possible, but when I looked back he was still following. I went a different route from which I had used to go there and just kept running through very busy crowds looking back over and over. Eventually after about 5 minutes of running I finally looked back and he wasn't there anymore approaching me. I went back to the restaurant and my parents were very angry at me. I have no idea if the man was following me or not. Maybe he was following me to help me? Maybe it was my 7-year-old brain assuming the worst? But either way I was afraid of clowns for years after that. I never actually told my parents about him either. I just told them I went to the restroom that was far away and got lost because I was silly. Anyway, sorry for the long post. Nothing special. I was hiking in North Texas. All of a sudden I couldn't hear anything but myself. As I was freaking out I started to realize I was taking only half of the steps I could hear. It'd step, step. This went on for about half a mile. When I stopped they stop a few seconds later. I got freaked out and set up my tent and just shoved everything in hearing steps the whole time. I have a moment to calm myself and I hear it. Hey! I don't know what it was or what scares me more, that was either a man following me. Or it wasn't. A while back, when I was about 13, I was pretty sure there was a ghost living in the back of my house. It started with odd dreams. In these dreams, I would be confronting the same large shadowy figure, and the confrontations would get more intense with each passing night. However, dreams are easy to brush off and I just moved on with life. Then the unexplained noises began, knocks on the walls and scratching. But that could just be the house settling or mice. Eventually the mice possibility was ruled out. That's alright, just means the house is settling. One day, I have to go into one of the rooms and the entire time I'm in this room I feel like I'm being watched. But hey, maybe I'm just being paranoid. As I leave the room, I feel something grab my hand. I scream and run to tell my dad. He says he'll smudge, we're Native American. A week goes by and my little brother starts to say he's been seeing a strange shadowy figure in the back and now I'm pretty sure there's something there. My dad still has not smudged. That same night, I FaceTime some friends and we do a late night study session. I go downstairs to get some coffee since I'm feeling tired, and while I'm down there, the noises start up again. I mute myself in call since I really don't want to explain the noises and get told I'm crazy, and since I'm already almost done with making the coffee I decide to stick it out. As I'm leaving the kitchen, one of the dining room chairs, kitchen and dining room are connected, pulls out from the table and blocks my way. I ran up the stairs and into my room. My friend asks me why I looked so scared. I explain and they all look confused and ask me why I didn't think it was the other person messing with me. I ask what they mean and they all say they saw someone walk by. I told my dad the next morning, and while we're talking my mom walks in. I finally inform her of the situation, to which she says she was having some odd dreams with a shadowy figure as well. As we're having this conversation, we hear the front door unlock and then open. My dad smudged that day, and nothing like that has ever happened in this house again. I go camping every year on the PNW of Washington for Thanksgiving. One night, and I'm not sure why, at 4 a.m. something was telling me to just take a walk. So I did. There were so many deer in the fields all staring. But not at me, it was something behind me. Thinking it was a cougar, I used common sense and didn't make any sudden movements, just kept walking. When I got to the waterfront I literally got into the freezing water and turned around. It wasn't a cougar. Wasn't a bear, I'm not entirely sure what it was. But it sounded big. Not a horror story, but it is a bit creepy/spooky. I was wandering around the local cemetery in the summer. I love cemeteries because they are quiet and you can see wildlife. I'm also a bit of a goth. LOL. Anyway, near the entrance of the cemetery, I saw a girl about 8 or 9 years old in Edwardian clothing. Specifically, she was wearing a heavy red velvet dress and a straw hat. She was skipping about, she looked shadowy and semi-transparent, and then she disappeared into thin air. This was about 2008-09. I saw a lot of spirits around that time. My friends and I scared the piss out of a ghost tour once. There's this public historical park in our town called the Garden of the Greater Light, that I guess used to be the church of a cult that all died in a fire there in the 1800s. It's out of the way, at the end of a dead-end road, but pretty central, and rarely visited, especially at night. The perfect place to do a bit of sneaky underage drinking for our alt/punk/goth/hippie high school group. Oh, and it's got this round stonework design in its courtyard with a raised border that makes for it a decent circle to sit around. So one night around 9:30-10 p.m., there's around 15 of us, all sitting in this circle, passing around a couple bottles and some joints, trying to get up the impetus to move to a better spot. All of a sudden, we hear voices and steps coming up the road. There's no other way out, so everyone just hides their booze, and we all stop talking, figuring it's just someone walking a dog or something, but no one would have any reason to come in. Suddenly a whole group of like 20 tourists, led by the town's ghost tour guy, in his top hat and cape, walking backwards while telling the story of the haunted cultist church, come around the corner, and there we are, all sitting around this stonework circle, in the dark, mostly wearing all black, in silence, just sitting there, heads turned, already staring at them as they walked around the corner. They freaked out. A bunch of them took off, screaming. The tour guide turns and stares at us, for like a solid minute, not saying anything. Then he turns to the two remaining couples, and in a mock Bela Lugosi voice, says, "And it seems they've returned from the grave." Ooh. While holding up the edges of his cape like bat wings and ushering them back out the way they had come. I've experienced sleep paralysis a few times now, and every time it gets scarier to the point where I don't know what is real anymore in those few minutes when it happens. 2 weeks ago, I was having trouble falling asleep. That's how most of my experiences with sleep paralysis start, so I kept tossing and turning to find a comfortable position so that I could finally sleep, and when I did I just closed my eyes. It felt like a couple of minutes passed by, when all of a sudden I started feeling like my body was getting heavier by the second. It was like I was getting pressed into the mattress and I couldn't move at all. It felt like my arms and legs were tied to the bed, even though I was sleeping on my side, like how I always sleep, and breathing became harder. I tried not to panic and take small breaths to not feel like I'm suffocating. I knew for a fact that everyone in the house was sleeping because it was 5 a.m. But then my bedroom door opened and my sister came in. My brain was telling me it was her, but that thing was just a silhouette of a human being. It didn't even have a face, it was a shadow, but for some reason it felt like it was smiling. It sat down on the side of the bed next to me, and just stared at me for a bit. It then laid down and slid one arm under my neck, so that my head was on its arm and rested its hand on my forehead. The other arm was resting over my stomach. All while that happening, my heart was beating so fast, I thought I was gonna throw up and choke on my own vomit. I was fucking mortified. The smile kept getting bigger and bigger. I was already feeling like the gravity was gonna pull me down to the center of the earth with all the pressure I was feeling on my chest and body, but that thing started to kind of squeeze my head with the arm under my head, then it clenched the hand of the arm around my stomach into a fist, and started pushing it into my side. It was so painful and I felt every second of it as if it was actually happening to me in real time. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but it was so hard I almost started crying right there. "It's not real, it's just a dream," I chanted that in my head the whole time, while begging myself to open my eyes, but the pressure kept increasing. Then suddenly, this thing brought its face close to my ear and called my name. I woke up and the pressure started to decrease fast, but not fast enough for me to spring up and try to leave the room quickly. When I tell you I almost pissed myself when I heard my name, I'm not even kidding. But the thing is that when it called my name it felt like I heard it right as I woke up, but not really fully awake. I don't even know how to explain it. Tears started to stream down my cheeks, Tokyo drifting right into my ears, making me all kind of uncomfortable, but I had no energy left to move or give a shit, so I just went back to sleep and woke up the next day to write everything down to remember it. Sorry if it sounds like I'm rambling and if it doesn't make much sense, but I have hard time concentrating when I have to write lengthy and detailed stories. I just wanted to share this cause it was like living a horror movie scene. I was probably 15 at the time and my cousin was 13. We always used to hang out on this warehouse roof in a parking lot of a park. There is a direct view from the roof down to the parking lot. We would usually hang out up there and see all the cars coming into the parking lot and hope they wouldn't see us. We were easily entertained. We would also just hang out up there during the day because it was just chill and nice up there. One night a car pulled up into the parking lot and the car door opened. We stopped looking in hopes no one would see us. About 30 seconds later we heard crying and screaming and what sounded like someone getting beaten up. I can't confirm if they actually were because we stopped looking cause we were scared lol. Keep in mind me and my cousin were having a sleepover and we snuck out of his house to go up there. The screaming noises scared the shit out of us and we jumped about 11 feet off the roof onto a hill and started running into some bushes. We hid behind a bush but we were too loud and two guys wearing all black, or at least I think they were wearing black. It was hard to tell because it was dark out, but they started walking directly towards us, then starting picking up the pace. We immediately started bolting for the nearest fence and we made it over. They got about 20 feet from us before we got over a fence. That is the biggest rush I've ever felt in my life by far. We called the police but nothing ever came from it. As we called them the next day we both were just in shock, but to this day I wonder what was going on in that parking lot. Maybe it's just me being paranoid, but during the pandemic there was a string of kidnappings in my area and everyone was told to be on high alert, don't walk with headphones in, etc. I would walk home from work up a pretty busy street every night, but since everything was shut down it had become a little more quiet. I was walking up the hill on my way home after dark this one night and the road was totally quiet. Then this car immediately pulled up to the curb and stopped directly in front of me. Since we were in the midst of the pandemic and I assumed it was an Uber dropping someone off, happens a lot, I stopped walking and waited so that I could keep distance from the person getting out of the car. They were pretty close. On one side of me was the road and on the other side just a line of houses. I waited for a bit and started getting this feeling, so I decided to test out my paranoia and looked down the street, saw no cars coming and started to cross instead of continuing past the car that was just sitting there. As soon as I turned and made to step off the curb, the car in front peeled off right quick, so fast the tires did a little screech. I didn't even make it of the curb. I ended up just getting back up on the sidewalk and hurrying home. It happened again sometime later, only this time I did cross the street, then crossed back, and the same car pulled in front of me again. So I crossed the street again, and a bunch of dudes got out of the car and started arguing each other. TBF, even if I am just overly observant or paranoid, I'd rather be that than kidnapped, so. Since I know it wasn't real, I'm not sure if it counts, but it felt real. So, when I was younger, around like 15 maybe, one night I woke up to sleep paralysis and couldn't move. I instantly knew what it was and I was scared, so I used everything in me to try to say a prayer. I started saying the Lord's Prayer, but it came out in a deep raspy demon-like voice like I was possessed. I tried my hardest to get the full prayer out, and as I was saying it my bed started shaking. When I was done, I finally willed myself to open my eyes and it was a black silhouette right in my face with their hair sticking up all over the place, and I heard like a scream. After that I finally threw myself out of the bed and ran upstairs to my mom's room. Was staying up quite late one night on a weekend playing Rocket League or something. This was in the middle of summer, so I had the window cracked open to keep me cool. I had the games on low volume cause I didn't want to wake up my dad or grandma who were in the house, which is the only reason I heard this. About 2 in the morning, I heard this blood-curdling scream, presumably a woman yelling help at the top of her lungs. I paused my game. I listened to her scream for probably about a minute straight, before she was cut off mid-scream, and I didn't hear a thing afterwards. Going to the shop the next day, I see an ambulance and 2 cop cars outside a house around the corner from my house. Someone broke in, raped and murdered woman, case closed. They stopped my dad and showed him a picture, asking if he'd seen anyone that looked like this guy. Kinda like Nico from GTA 4, but messy blonde hair and uneven beard. We hadn't seen him and we didn't care that much either, so we get back from the shops and I'm drinking one of my dad's beers in the garden. When I finish it, I throw the bottle over the fence into the hedge at the end of our tiny garden, but it doesn't smash. Instead, that guy gets up from our bushes and chucks the bottle back at me. Of course I run inside and lock all the doors, but by the time I told my dad, the guy was long gone. I reckon he was casing our place, as our place was pretty run down and easy to break into. First, I do not believe in supernatural things, ghosts, etc., but something happened when I was a kid that I cannot explain and gave me the creeps for a long time. I had a habit of twirling my hair around my finger all the time. Even at night I would sometimes do this in my sleep and wake up with my hand all tied into my hair. One night I felt like I was being petted on my head. It woke me up, and in my drowsy state I assumed I was again tied up in my hair, but I realized both hands were down at my sides. I fell back asleep soon after, but I did think that was weird. The next morning at breakfast my oldest brother kept looking at me like he was afraid. He hardly ate and just kept looking over like he tried but failed to not look. He was even pale. I asked him finally, kind of angrily, why he kept looking at me. He burst out crying and said he was scared because he saw a shadow man standing over me during the night. That's the first time I remember feeling that ice down your spine feeling. He told me later when we had all kind of gotten past that uncomfortable breakfast, that it was just a man-shaped shadow but with a top hat. It took some time before I could sleep comfortably again. My brother insisted on what he saw that night into adulthood. 40 years later, and I don't really believe it, but I can't explain it either and the memory is very clear. I used to work in medical records and one afternoon, hungover, I had to go to the main archive of the hospital. It was in the far corner of the basement, dimly lit and unnecessarily creepy in its own right. Naturally, it was also right next to the hospital morgue. While I was in there grabbing files, I heard a strange sound that resembled someone taking a sharp intake of breath, right next to my ear. I grabbed the records and bolted out of the room, locking the door and telling the guy over my right shoulder how creepy I found that room. When I turned, the corridor was empty. I ran. While sprinting, I got a sense of something rushing up behind me and my bones turned to ice. Made it back to the main medical records and told my coworker all about it. That evening, just as I was leaving for the day, my boss called me into his office and chewed me out for scaring my coworkers with what had happened. He finished his tirade with, "Why do you think you have a job? We can't get anyone else to work down there." My dad used to share an office with another guy. Like, there was one desk between them. He was honest, hardworking, tidy, friendly, considerate, and pretty good at his job. He didn't drink much, but he hung out during happy hour and always made sure everyone got home safe. He was a retired cop, a deacon at his church, and full-time caregiver for his gravely ill mother. He taught Sunday school, organized charities through his church, and was well liked by virtually everyone. He drove to New Mexico where his body was discovered in his vehicle with a confession note and a what was believed to be vial of cyanide. His note claimed responsibility for the murders of 2 teenage girls at a close-ish beach and a college co-ed in the county just south of where I now live. My mom used to bring my sister and I to visit my dad at his work frequently after daycare, since it was right around the corner. I can't remember him, but I must have met this guy and that gives me the heebie-jeebies. So check it. It was myself, my friend Clint, my friend Austin, and Austin's girlfriend. We've all known each other for about a decade. Austin had asked out his girlfriend, her name is Julie by the way, before Clint got the balls to do it, but he wanted to ask her out bad and we all knew it, so obviously he was really butthurt that Austin asked first and got Julie as his girlfriend. But I mean, we've all been friends forever, no one thought anything that crazy of it. We were all going out to drink. It's like 11 o'clock at night, everything's going cool, we're all pretty faded, and Austin starts making out with Julie at some point. I can see that Clint is mad, but I don't think much of it. I go to the truck to go get more beer out of the back and put it into the cooler with some more ice. Next thing I hear is a bunch of screams. I run back to where they're at and I find Clint with blood all over himself. He had stabbed Austin in the neck and face like 50 times and was proceeding to try to cut off his head while Julie was freaking out. I try to calm him down, but he has the craziest look in his eye and then starts stabbing Julie like a madman. I attempt to save her, but he stabs me even a few times. I get away and go get my phone and call the cops. They get there pretty fast, but all I kept hearing was Julie screaming even more and more until she got quiet. When the cops got there, they found Clint. He tried to slash his own throat and wrist after killing Austin and Julie viciously. They take him and are able to arrest him and take him to the hospital where he barely lives. He is now in prison, and yeah, Austin and Julie passed away unfortunately. I had to go to the hospital as well for my stab wounds, and it was truly the most scariest night I've ever experienced and don't wish it on anyone. When I was 14, my friend and I were hanging out at the mall in the makeup section of a department store. We were having fun, but everything was too expensive, so we just hooted and awed and walked on. I took my lip gloss out of my purse, put some on, and headed toward the mall door to leave. Two huge burly men in plainclothes blocked our path. Without a word, they grabbed us both by the arm and started dragging us through the store. We were terrified. They didn't introduce themselves and didn't speak a single word, so we thought we were being abducted in broad daylight. We kicked and screamed as they marched us through the store, yelling to other customers for help. "We don't know these men. Someone help, they're kidnapping us." Everybody just stood slack-jawed and stared. We were inches from the exit door before the men made a sharp turn and marched us down a thin hallway. It turns out those men were poorly trained security guards who thought we were stealing. They showed me video of me putting the lip gloss on, so they thought it appropriate to physically grab us and drag us kicking and screaming through the store as punishment without announcing who they were or what they were doing. I showed them my lip gloss that wasn't even the brand they carried, and they let us off with a warning. When my mom came to pick me up, I cried in her arms. It wasn't a horror story, but I thought that day was the day I would be stolen, raped, and murdered by terrifying men in broad daylight. This requires a little bit of a scene set up. So, I grew up in a neighborhood that's back street had a park on the corner, then some wooded creek area, a small water processing plant, weird, I know, and then a dirt trail that ran up the backside of every street in the neighborhood. When I was about 9 years old, myself and two friends were at the park making plans for our secret club when a truck that was the same make, model, and color as one of the girls' stepfather pulled up to the parking area of the park. But no one got out or rolled down the window or anything. We stared at it for a minute or two thinking her stepdad was picking us up, and started to walk towards it. We got about 15 feet from the truck when we could see through the window that the man inside was not who we were expecting, and suddenly the door started to open. We all three knew in that moment what was happening, and with zero talking somehow all three came up with the same exact idea. We bolted across the park and into the wooded area, down into the creek, up the other side so we were standing against the fence to the water processing plant. Then got close enough to the road to be hidden, but still be able to see where the truck was. It was driving slowly up and down the street, as if he was waiting for us to just give up and come back out. We waited until he started to drive back towards the stop sign at the corner of the park, and when he was far enough away that we knew we could make it, we ran along the fence line from the creek side of the water plant to the trail side, and hid in some thick bushes. He saw us as soon as we came out from the trees, but had to get to the end of the street to pull a U-turn, so we were luckily hidden again before he got to the back of the street again. Then he idled there for what felt like forever before turning back around. Once he was halfway back up the street, we ran up the trail about 4 streets to one of the girls' aunt's house where we told her family what had just happened. Her uncle grabbed a gun and went to the park, but the truck was long gone. We never saw the truck again. But I often think about how horribly that situation could have gone. If he had caught even the slightest glimpse of our clothes when we hid in the bushes, we would have had nowhere to run. I had a dream I was being chased by a character from VeggieTales. It was a green bell pepper, and it had a crown and a fur-lined cape. It would appear in toilets and pop out and scream. In the dream I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth, and the monster popped out of the toilet and screamed. I then yelled, and sprinted out of my apartment, down the stairs and outside the building. Seconds later the building exploded. Then, out of the dust, was the monster. It was hopping over, and it chased me for miles, and then it ate me. I woke up screaming. Moral of the story, don't watch VeggieTales. I was returning home from a store that's located a bit out of the way, and at some point a van stopped near me, the back doors opened, and some guy I didn't know said, "Girl, get in a way that I imagine was supposed to sound like they're inviting me. It didn't feel any kind of right, or safe, so I walked back without turning my back on them, and that made them close the doors and accelerate away, like rubber burning accelerate. I saw that van a few more times in the vicinity, but I kept to places with people and at some point it disappeared. I know it's minor, but for me it was plenty scary. Once when I was about 5, I was at a play date at my friend's apartment that faced the side of a hill very closely. I looked outside the window and saw a woman dressed in white, similar to a wedding dress, with a light shining on her from across where I was. She was walking uphill and I saw her from the side. She was staring at the top with very fixed eyes. It freaked the shit out of me, so I ran to where our moms were, but they didn't believe, thinking Amy was just trying to scare the girl, something not unusual for me then. It was so frustrating. To this day I don't feel like that woman was a real person, and it was the only thing I've ever actually seen. I lost my mother coming up 2 decades ago to a long terminal illness. She was an amazing person and great person who raised me and a sibling alone for much of our childhood. Her final days in hospital were traumatic and not a good way to go. Since that time I sporadically have dreams which she is in. In every single dream bar none she is either terminally ill or becomes terminally ill during the dream. In virtually every single dream she dies, normally in a fairly traumatic way. Each dream affects me for a few days. I don't believe there is any external influences in dreams, that is to say it's all a conjuring of my own mind and there's nothing more to read into it other than in my own psychology. In some ways I wish the dreams would stop, but in other ways dreams, or nightmares if you like, allow you to feel like you have contact with people no longer with us, even if you know it's just a figment of your own imagination. It's just hard being made to repeatedly relive the worst 3 days of my, or her lives. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share and we will see you in the next video.